to a very special gentleman. His name is Dr. Harry Oster. He prefers, not Harry, Henry, I'm sorry. I'm horrible with names, ask the kids. But I called you a boy's name, so you're okay, right? All right, so he prefers to be called by his first name, Henry. And he has got some wonderful information to share with you, all of which is true, factual, and happened to him.
First of all, I'd like to thank Ms. Kaplan for inviting me, and the school itself. It's my pleasure and honor. I hope you're comfortable and reclining a little bit. I don't want to hear any snoring though. My pleasure to speak to groups and schools is exemplified in this particular case because exactly what you will hear happened to me at your particular age. 12 and a half years old, all of the things I will tell you took place. I'm a little odd kind of a person because the rarity of speaking is because there are very, very few German-born Jewish survivors, because there were very few children intended to survive the concentration camps. As a matter of fact, at the end of World War II, in all the camps, all over Europe, fewer than 30 German-born boys under the age of 18 were found. Why one of these would be me, I have never found the answer for that. At the age of 88, I've had many years of chance to share my stories, and I have been speaking more or less officially at the Museum of Talmud for the last 40 years. I volunteered there because when they put a little announcement in the paper of needing and wanting to have volunteers, I decided maybe there might be some interest in my story. It turns out I was enthusiastically received because they didn't have any other German-born survivors available. So to be able to address you today is one of many that I've done, hundreds, but it is the first time that it had such a large group at exactly this age that I'm talking about. I was born in the city of Cologne in Germany. Cologne was a city similar to our New Orleans. It had the Mardi Gras, it had culture, theater, more than others did. It was a city that even had its own little dialect. It was a happy city. I'm the sole survivor of a family of 19 uncles, aunts, parents, grandparents. Most of them lived in the area. I'm the only child. My parents had lived in Cologne for many years. As a matter of fact, my family has lived in Germany over 180 years. Germany was not a terrible country to live in for Jews until 1933. As a matter of fact, in 1864, Germany actually gave the Jews in Germany the very first opportunity of citizenship. And with that, the German Jewish population had an opportunity no longer to be suppressed. They had the opportunity to, guess what? Education. Education was the very first time that you could enter higher education, university, colleges. The first time Jews could enter careers, and business, banking, retail. So the Jews in Germany did not think anything like the Holocaust could even be imagined. I lived in Cologne, a little boy with nothing but naughty intentions. I had a nickname of Naughty Little Henry. Unfortunately, I have to tell you, Henry is not my original name. My original name is Catcher, like Heinz 57 is my original name. The worst thing that you can imagine as far as names are concerned was my middle name. Of all the names in the world, it was Adolf, because that was my grandpa's name, whom I had never met, who had, even was died before I was born, it was customary to name the children after the departed or deceased parent. Well, I had to suffer for that because the Germans ultimately forced every Jewish male to add the name Israel, and all the Jewish women, Sarah. And when the Nazi encountered my name, which I had to give very often, as Heinz Adolf Israel Oster, I did receive punishments for just coincidence of the unfortunate combination of names. But to start at the very beginning of my life, I had my very first day of school in 1934. Now Hitler came to power in 1933, certainly not by democratic means. We had no idea what a Nazi party would imply. Of course, there were campaigns, there were endangering comments made, but you think politics, you hear these things, will they really be implemented? No, you don't think so. Because it was a wonderful life. My family was a middle-class family. We lived in a lovely apartment on the top floor of a building. My father was the director of a department store. My mom, that was customary, was a housewife, which was a major, major job in those days because we had none of the conveniences we have today. My mom's responsibility, other than raising me, even as an only child, was to go every single day to shopping because there was no refrigeration. We had none of the conveniences. So my mom was a busy woman taking care of the household and raising the child. The first day in school was an indication of what might come. I went to school like everybody else with a little anxiety, anticipation, curiosity, a little apprehension. And we went with a little beret. We had a backpack which had a little tablet, electronic one, it was a little blackboard, the crayon, and a little sponge hung out of the backpack. And most important, we had a sugar bag. The sugar bag was like a megaphone, like cheerleaders would use. You carried it in your right arm, and it was filled with goodies, cookies, toys, candy, and it was the make the day a little bit less horrendous in one's imagination. As we left school, which was a half Jewish and half Gentile school, we were received by children of slightly larger age, about your age. Well, the idea was the Germans had a concept that we must take care of the children. It meant that own children, Gentile children, were all put into Hitler Youth uniform, starting at the age of 8. Just like Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, except the intent was nothing honorable. They had the group leaders that indoctrinated the children into the philosophy and the intent and the plans of the Nazi Party, which most important also at that age, your age, was you must take the Jewish children, children that were gypsies or other designated children of like Catholic children. Germany was not a Catholic country. You were indoctrinated to hate. You're asked to really rat on your parents. If they may have said, oh, I don't think Hitler's ever anything good, the little kid could go to the group leader and say, my mommy said Hitler was not very good. Daddy would disappear within a couple of days. Maybe he would return, and maybe not. The Germans were intimidated. As far as the Jewish children were concerned, Germany decided they must eliminate the children. Now, in the beginning, Germans had built concentration camps within the first month Hitler came to power. As much as I hate to say in all fairness, let me say in all accuracy, concentration camps all over Germany were not intended to be killing fields. They were designed to hold people that Nazis thought would be undesirable, enemies of the party, enemies of Germany, dignitaries, members of the Catholic Church, bishops. You have a lot of Germans, to be accurate, that were opposed to Hitler. If they voiced it, indicated it, if it was rumored, the The Gestapo would come, would arrest them, and put them into concentration camps. So originally, concentration camp held anti-Nazis. Of course, Jews were not in favor, and they rapidly filled the concentration camps with overflow capacity. The biggest problem that we had as children, we were threatened to be eliminated, which wasn't really specified how they would do it. Fortunately, 3 countries, England, Switzerland, and France, accepted children called children transfer to get them out of the reach of the Nazis, to protect them, and of course, hopefully, sometime to reunite with their parents and their family. Why my parents never decided to send me, I have never been able to find out. So thousands of children were able to escape. The rest of it, we just had to wait what would happen. The first day that we left school, those that had been put in uniform were waiting for us. Quite organized, there were police watching that the groups would do what they had to do. The parents stood around and they harassed us, spat at them. They called us names that I don't think in my wildest imagination would have come up with some of these. They threw ink balls, whatever they could do. They came dressed in uniforms with a little scabbard. They took it out to threaten you, but they were really interested in getting your sugar back. They were interested to steal and get the contents. There was an event that was not what you would say the most violent, but it certainly was the inclination of youth indoctrinated by the Nazis to make sure that they are Superman, that they feel better than everybody else. Give a uniform, tell them that they're better than anybody else. Those kids, believe me, we talk about problems in bullying. There was the ultimate bullying, not only suggested but encouraged by the Nazis. It was the day of 1935 when Germany decided to call a Congress, as we might call it, which declared the Nuremberg laws, the city where the Nazi Party was founded. The Nuremberg laws were detrimental to the Jewish people because they now lost their citizenship and their civil rights. And whether you've studied already civil rights or will, let me tell you, you won't learn what civil rights really are. Everybody lost their job. Everybody was out of work. Everybody lost their business. Any career, no matter how high, was gone overnight in one night. All business that were Jewish owned were taken over by the Nazis. We lost our home, which happened to be an apartment. If you owned a regular home, you no longer owned it. You were no longer allowed to assemble anywhere. Could not attend any communal activities, movies, theaters, and big signs, you are forbidden. Even my parents who took me to the park every once in a while no longer could sit on the bench watching me. The bench had a sign, Jews are forbidden. Signs of Jews, Jews, Jews forbidden, all over the city and all the businesses that you can think of. No longer allowed to go anywhere. Public transportation, no streetcar allowed, no buses. We were stuck. We lost our apartment because it was in a Gentile home. The Germans had designated certain buildings that were in Jewish possession to remain in Jewish possession as long as it's crammed full of Jews. So from the 3-bedroom apartment, in a nice, beautiful building, we had to find refuge in a fairly dilapidated building in a poor part of the city, and we had to occupy a 1-bedroom apartment, meaning exactly 1 bedroom, 1 kitchen. However, it had to be occupied by 8 additional people. So here were 11 people. The adults took turns which night they were allowed to use the bed. The rest of us slept on the floor. And I slept in the kitchen on a little wooden bench. And from 1935 to 1947, and never slept in a bed. None of this was known, and as a little kid, you didn't really feel that it was the worst thing. Inconvenient, yes. Because I had a feeling that what was happening wasn't all that bad. Why? No more schools. Jewish schools were closed. And from 1935 to 1947, when I came here in the United States, I had a total of 1.5 years of schooling. So I knew nothing about anything. As it happened, one can get by if you have no choice. Because you cannot imagine the atmosphere of 11 people living in a one-bedroom apartment, fear, desperation, and no way to escape. Things had gotten worse. You could no longer get subscription to magazines. We couldn't do anything to be even informed. You lived in stifled conditions that you could not escape. Now many people ask me, why don't you just leave, for heaven's sake? Why hang around? Well, you can say that in this country. In Germany, there was no escape. The Germans had intended that you should perish. They did allow you to leave if you could, and many people did, but it was a small number of people. The other problem was nobody in the world wanted you. Nobody, no country opened its borders. A little bit like what we're hearing now. It's a very strange thing to hear things again that I heard about 70 years ago. The problem that existed was if the world didn't accept you, how did you get out of the country to begin with? You had to have a permit to leave because the Germans were not interested that you should escape. So by the time we had everything happen, Germany had only a population of 600,000 Jews out of a total population of 16 million. The Jewish population in Germany was simply 1%. No way to be able to reduce it successfully. So we were stuck. It was a problem that was to be accepted, but you certainly could not ever prepare for something like this, and you were desperate. In 1938, a night that will be remembered in history, took place where the Germans, after the war, thought, we had no idea. It's just one of those things happen, you know. Really, all the major cities in Germany burned down the synagogues, the temples, any Jewish connected buildings, community centers, and trashed all the remaining Jewish stores which had been permitted to exist since 1935, just to supply the Jewish population. The city of Cologne, where I lived, had a total of 8,000 Jews, desperate Jews, frightened population that one cannot really describe. With that particular night, with the trashing of the stores, the smashing and the looting, and the broken glass littering the sidewalk, reflecting the flames of the burning synagogues and temples, homes, gave the name the Germans had in a sickening way, the night of crystal night, just because the glass reflected and looked like crystal. 33,000 men were arrested to build more or expand the existing concentration camp, which by the end of the war in Germany alone exceeded 2,000 camps. My father was not arrested because he was at a forced labor camp since 1935. Came home once a month, brought a few marks of German denomination, and we somehow managed to exist. In 1939, this night, by the way, was the 9th of November 1938, observed and commemorated every single year in most Jewish communities. In 1939, Germany decided to start World War II. The second World War, in 25 years. The intent that they had was to dominate the world, and they were doing a pretty good job. because the Germans loved uniforms, flags, all the propaganda, and they were convinced they were superior to everybody else, and certainly managed to convince the world that they were on the track that we could not necessarily stop. The big problem that we did not know was the end of Jewish survival in all of Germany. First of all, in Germany, we had no way of knowing what was really the plan. The rest of European countries were now threatened as well. The Germans had a major problem. With the invasion of Poland, they had foreign land, foreign soil, which they inherited, unfortunately. No 600,000 Jews, diminished by 39, probably less, a little bit more than half. They now inherited 3 million Jews just in Poland. Poland had the largest Jewish population in Europe, and they now had to deal with that. Of course, that meant they had to build facilities to get rid of that many people. And all through Poland, near the major cities, they built facilities to accomplish that. But before they did this, and before they implemented the use of these facilities, they decided to concentrate the German Jewish population, send them to Poland, send them to the cities that were large enough to create a ghetto. A ghetto is a very simple way to take care of a lot of people. You take a bunch of blocks of the cities, you surround it with electrified wires, put guards on them, guard towers with machine guns, and shove in as many people as you can. The city that we were destined to ultimately arrive was unknown to us, because the Germans decided one day you have to report for what they call resettlement, which meant you had to leave Germany. There was no way to escape, no way to resist. You were supposed to be in the facility, if you're familiar with LA Convention Center, in other words, a large facility used for various purposes. And on a certain Monday, we were supposed to present ourselves. My parents, myself, and one suitcase. The Germans don't wait for anything that they can control. And the Saturday night before the departure, they broke down the doors of the small apartment, and always under several conditions, always in the darkness of the night, and always accompanied by German shepherds, trained and ready to tear you apart, and many times they did. They had flashlights. We were disoriented, we were confused, and they took us to that particular center. On Monday, as predicted, they put us on a train to destination unknown. No clue, no way to change anything. The train rode for a couple of 3 days. We arrived someplace. We were unloaded, and we were greeted by people who looked emaciated. They looked like zombies, like they're going through space. And they announced, welcome to Lodz. Lodz was the second largest city in Poland, the first one being capital of Warsaw. And they said, well, you are in a ghetto now. And indeed, there we were, in a place we didn't speak the language. As German-speaking Jews, you were not welcome among Polish Jews. You spoke the language of the perpetrators and the enemy, but we had to exist and live together. We were put in a room which is basically all there was in those buildings. Just rooms, no facility, no heat, no gas, water, not even bathrooms. All this was done in that part of the city, sort of wherever you could find. We were put in a room that was empty, small, wall, ceiling, floor, one window, one door, with 21 people total. We didn't even have, you remind me when you're sitting like this, that's the way we had to sit, because there was not enough room to stretch out, so we took turns. Who would stretch out and build up the night for a few minutes, And the only way you could survive the bitter cold of Eastern European winters, sharing body heat, since we were so compressed with one another. We were put to work. Lodz was a city that had capabilities and capacities for manufacture. The concentration camp didn't exist that we knew of, and all we knew the ghetto was done maybe just as a working camp, a place to produce. My mom had to make iron plates that went under the boots of the German military. My dad had to repair the fences, and for some miraculous way, I was forced to work in the agriculture department. If it wasn't so sad, I'd break out laughing, because what kind of agriculture can you have among buildings? However, there was what apparently must have been a small, abandoned, certainly not used playground that had just between the buildings. And there was a small field adjacent to the building structure that was just nothing, just a field, small. The Germans decided to use that field and have us cultivate. They gave us a shovel, a rake, start digging, make something grow. My dad, having been a director, had not had any manual experience, and under force and punishment, he learned and had to do what was necessary to survive. Survival was very, very complicated, because the total nourishment you received was every Friday afternoon you stood in line, you got one loaf of bread for the whole week, and the only other nourishment you received was a watery cabbage soup. Even that had no nutrition, only if you had a place to work. Occasionally they would throw out a can of horse meat. Occasionally you'd get from the ghetto kitchen some potato peels. You didn't have enough to survive, and my dad didn't last any longer than 5 months. Came home one evening and reclined and expired. We had to work 12 hours, from before 6 in the morning to 6 at night, when curfew took place. The reason that I had survived was, as somebody said, your ingenious ability to figure out the conditions we're living in. No, it did everything by, call it the remotest possibility to survive. I put holes into my pocket, tied my pant legs, which was a common mode of dressing for the winter, for the snow and the dust. And I allowed the seeds I was supposed to plant just fall down to my ankles. There were peas, there were beans, lentils, corn, and of course the other possibility was to steal a few potatoes that you were supposed to plant, which you normally cut into quarters, put them in the ground. Well, they were not all quarters, they were thirds. I stole some, I hid some, and before curfew would go back to the field and retrieve them. Not much help with potatoes, since you had no way to prepare them. We would take a stick of wood, and maybe build a little fire, and hope that we could consume it. We lost weight enormously. I took a chance that was a deadly one. The Germans had something they called Sunday's entertainment. Sunday's entertainment consisted of erecting a gallows on that abandoned playground and executing Jews that were condemned to death, which was the only punishment, by whatever contrived imaginary, maybe occasionally legitimate violation of the law. There was something that I certainly didn't particularly ever want to see, and I avoided it for a long, long time. I took a chance that if were I caught with stolen seeds, stolen food, I would be such a candidate. I worked with two guys that were born in Lodz. They were Jewish. If you want to just imagine the size, it could be pro football players. They were really very hefty. What struck me was very peculiarly, they did not look emaciated, they didn't look skinny. They were well fed, it seemed. They were born in Lodge in South Africa, maybe they had connections. But one day, they came to work on a Monday and gave me a slice of bread. A slice of bread other than your regular ration was something you fortunately would never be able to judge how important and how valuable it was. I accepted it, didn't question it, and I probably thought maybe because I was a scrawny little kid, I was only 12, almost 13 years old, maybe they looked at me like a mascot. Give the kid a slice of bread. I accepted it and shared it with my mom, and we felt very fortunate to have extra food over regular ration. The first time I had to watch Sunday's entertainment, they emptied the buildings at gunpoint, Roman shepherds, of course, however, this was during the day. And we had to surround the playground, which I stood in the back of the taller adults behind me was fine. I didn't want to see them. And I was prodded with the bayonet. Raise up, you have to look. And to my great shock and surprise and incomprehension, who were the executioners? Who were the hangmen of the ghetto? But my two buddies, my two benefactors of a slice of bread. I'll divert there for a moment and say that after 70 years of not ever putting anything in writing, somebody insisted to write my story with me. And then last year, a book was published, and we have many of the story, and much more than I can cover today. And my co-writer, who is not Jewish, said, you know, I cannot understand the inhumanity. He is a World War II buff, so he knew a lot about history. I say, well, you lived in Germany, you were born there, and you lived for 17 years through all of this, 12 of which was, of course, the Nazi era. And all the stories we had covered, there was one human kindness ever extended to you all these years. And I had to agree with that. And I said, I don't know what we're going to call the book. And he said, well, if you talk about kindness, maybe you could consider that one slice of bread on occasional Mondays after the hangings. And he said, you know, that's true. And so the book is called The Kindness of the Hangman, which is not what you might say an obvious Holocaust title, but it meant everything to me. In a way, I would say, I'm paying tribute to two people who had a deadly business, who were at least kind to me by one slice of bread. This went on for 2 or 3 years. Nightly raids. Nightly raids were consistent of trucks coming into the ghetto, dogs barking, guns being shot, buildings were empty, people were loaded on the trucks to depart and never to be heard or seen again. The room that we occupied with 21 people, I happened to be there one day, all by myself, and I noticed that the ceiling was a cover, just wooden slats. Still being a little curious, I wanted to know what's up there, not expecting really to find anything. But I opened the door, stood on the doorknob, reached up, pulled myself up enough to see, and it was just the empty space under the roof. The raids that took care at night, always with great chaos, confusion, disorientation. I decided to let people go ahead first, held back my mom, climbed up to the roof, was able to pull her out since she probably didn't weigh 100 pounds anymore, and we were able to evade being captured and be taken away 2 times. Sometimes I would think that I should feel guilty not having shared my hiding space, nobody else was curious enough. But I'm convinced by everybody I asked that had more people been up there, we most likely would have detected noise and breathing, and we would all have perished. That's consolation in my way of thinking. We were asked one day to bring ourselves to a place between the German administrative barracks. We're going to be moved to a place for employment, better food, better housing. But most important, before we do that, you are to bring the harvest off that field. I got my mom, we presented ourselves, and in no time we found ourselves on a train to destination Norway. The train rode for a day and a half. Came to us Saturday afternoon. They picked me up to take a look at the outside the barbed wire window and these covered livestock wagons. And all I could see, some kind of grain, also ready to be harvested, but interspersed with barbed wires and cement poles. No idea. Everybody thought I could find the name of a railroad station, the city where we are. The train actually waited for nothing longer than the Germans decided to move on the darkness of night. The train rode maybe a few hundred yards, came to a stop, and we were brutally ejected from the wagons. Chaos, fear, unbelievable panic. Germans were everywhere, always with the German shepherds. We were immediately separated, men on one side, women on the other. Horrendous confusion and a powerful force making the separation. My mom disappeared as if a tornado had pushed her away and merged in the column of women, and that was the last time I ever heard of her. I am now in the column of men. We marched to the end of the platform, and an officer stood there pointing left and right and left and right, splitting the male column. We were on the right, we entered the barrack, we were stripped, shaved our head, pushed through an archway with dust, the painful solution. We showered for maybe 15 20 seconds, shoved out the other end of the barrack, and I find myself in a clearing, sort of a courtyard, surrounded by wire, but I'm next to a great building with a huge smokestack, an enormous flame, but most peculiarly, a very, very strange odor. Men in blue and striped white uniforms greeted us and they said, "Welcome to Auschwitz." And that was the first time any of us, at least my family, anybody, had heard of that place. The Polish Jews probably did know, because after all, it was a long, long established, regular Polish city, which happened to be a location where the Polish army used to have an enormous camp. So the Germans found barracks and everything readily available with which to plan the elimination of the Polish Jews. The other half of the column entered a neighboring barrack, were stripped, shaved, and they were doused, no, not with water, not with disinfectant. The doors were closed instead of water. The shower heads, very cleverly disguised as normal, produced a poison gas called Cyclone B, and these were the gas chambers of Auschwitz. To be accurate, Auschwitz was a name, like you would say, encompassing about 20 different facilities, industrial facilities. The place we were talking about really had a different name, called Birkenau, which was a facility of gassing and cremation of all the incoming Jews from all over Europe. The knowledge that we had was very quickly explained to us. We were made very, very sure to realize what we had just escaped. It was only about a year ago
that somebody sent me with some research that only 0.08 of 1% of arriving juveniles in Germany and Auschwitz were selected to live. Why me? Still no answer. It was only known that, even after the war, as I mentioned, in all of the European concentration camps, fewer than 30 German-born Jewish boys had survived. I will never have the explanation why such luck was given to me. My mom, who, as I said, didn't weigh even 100 pounds, would never have a chance to survive, and of course perished the day that we arrived. We're now in a camp holding approximately 100,000 men, and approximately only about 225 children, most of whom were used for experimental purposes, medical. I'm not going to go into this. There was also the rule you had to look at least to be 15 years or older to be safe, and even lined up on command. A horse doesn't always want to make love just because the girls are there. And how many can you take care of? There were hundreds of horses and very few stallions. So the Germans forced me to help the horse to mate. Well, let me tell you something. When a horse decides, yes, there are a couple of little horses I would like to mate, and that is his job, he doesn't need the help of a Jewish kid in the background and this behind. The German fellow were laughing what I had to go through. To me, it was not fun. It was not a deadly sport. The horse had attempts to hurt me with the hooves, tried to bite, but since I was in the back neighborhood, would usually take his rump and get rid of it. And I was able to evade. I was evading the horse, but not its tail. And frequently my face and hands were cut from the razor-sharp horse's tail, which had caused an impending doom for me. The Germans had periodic selection of all the workers in Auschwitz who would look worthy enough to keep alive because they had the strength and looked well, wasn't sick. The good news was that because we worked 16 hours a day, they only checked us twice on a returning around midnight. I was cut, I was bruised. I was in danger to be selected because I didn't look healthy. One of the kids in the group said, my dad told me that if you are ever hurt or you have a wound, if you want to heal faster, don't want to get infected, interestingly enough, not to catch scars, and maybe not even develop scabs, you have your own treatment, your urine. And so every time I was injured, I washed my face and hands with my own urine, and it did work. Of course, it didn't make me a very popular guy to sleep with that night, since we were in bunks stored like rolled up carpets, with nothing else, no blankets, no pillows, nothing. But everybody understood, and very soon, any other person injured had the same information to protect itself, and it worked like an antibiotic. In January 1945, we were asked to present ourselves in front of the building that we were housed. We were leaving. We were put on a march, which is commonly known as a death march. There must have been the 131 of us, and probably another 300 or 400, or more than that perhaps. They marched us to destination unknown. We were walking and marching in a manner that a death march is all organized. Very simple. We were informed if you fall behind by a certain distance from the main column, you will be executed. And they had wagons, machine guns, willing guards following the back. Don't even have to bother on the side. You hear the shooting, near the gradual diminishing number, all in the column. You saw the corpses and the snowbanks on the side of the road from the previous ones who couldn't keep up. You will find strength where you would never believe you had it. But the marching is not a smooth one. It's like a centipede. Because the people that are in the middle and come close to the end will now speed up. And the ones that are in the back will now leave surpass the ones in the middle. It's a really, really strange way of transporting people on foot. They put us on on livestock wagons again, this time without a roof, compacted, nose to nose, there was no way to move, really, really compacted. The train rode for about a day and a half. We hear a very strange noise. As we look up, we see two airplanes circling the train. They were planes that I didn't recognize the insignia of, because I was familiar with German insignia. These had just circles, blue and red circles. They were fighter planes of the Allies. At that moment, in 1945, was the first time that any of us knew that something had happened to Europe, that Europe had even been invaded. We live in a camp, or in the ghetto, we live in the vacuum. All you hear is rumors and hopes, but you have nothing, any information about the world around you. The airplanes were apparently circling, trying to decide what the content of these wagons were. In flight, they looked down, all they could see wagon after wagon after wagon, all with the same uniform. We did not know at that time that Germany was retrieving all its military back into Germany to defend Germany. They had already given up occupying all the countries. Plain and simple, Germany was losing the war. The Allied planes must have thought this was a military transport and decided to strafe us, machine guns to the train. I was against the front wooden part portion of the train and not in the trajectory of the bullets. This was, as we call it, friendly fire. Innocently, understandably, could not recognize one uniform from the other. We lost about 1/3 of the inhabitants in each wagon and had to continue with the carnage and the sadness of having lost many of our friends. We did have really friendships, but companions. The train rode for another 2 or 3 days, no food, of course. Climbed up a mountain and we were unloaded. They had to lift me up, I couldn't straighten out. And we were informed, welcome to Buchenwald. I could not believe, after all this, I'm back in my damn country of birth. Buchenwald was considered an elitist concentration camp, where the Germans put in people of prominence, of their own, foreign dignitaries. By this time, of course, the population had deteriorated and diminished, so they shoved in 1,500 boys from all over the country, from all different concentration camps, from all over Europe. We were there for no reason whatsoever that we could determine. We were not obviously treated well. Food was the same. On April 1, we noticed that even the little bit of food we received daily was not distributed. And no food was distributed for the following 10 days. April 11, at 3 o'clock on a Friday, we hear a strange noise. We were already too weak to care. We really did not believe that we could survive one more day. By hearing that noise, one of my friends struggled to look out the window, and there was only one window in the barrack. And it was difficult to move because the Germans had an old stable designed for 50 horses, by coincidence, which they compacted originally with 1,500 boys. It got busy. I had a place to study, I had a place where I was interrupted repeatedly, but It gave me a chance to study. I had probably a gift that I learned to speak English fairly quickly, and I could communicate. And I was interested in what I was studying, whatever it was. I had a little game I played. I was curious when I see one side of the page. I was anxious to find out what's on the other side of the page. And I was very fortunate to graduate with the eligibility to go to university. I had no money, worked what I could to give to the family, but I was eligible, of all things, to go to UCLA. UCLA was a challenge in itself. I had to learn the language while I'm doing it and the subject matter. Somehow I managed. Not very bright, I managed. What am I going to study? Well, I thought it might be interesting to study dentistry for the simple reason that when I came here, I had such health conditions, especially dental, for malnutrition. I was treated 2 or 3 times a week, and with that exposure, I'm going to be a dentist. I applied to dentistry, was eligible, with a lot of effort, a lot of sacrifice, had qualified to be eligible. University of California, Berkeley told me, I'm sorry, we cannot take you unless you go back to your homeland. I'm going to go back to Germany to practice dentistry. You gotta be kidding. Well, he said, we only can allow you under foreign student allotment. Otherwise, you cannot practice in California. The other university I applied, to my great shock, was highly anti-Semitic. I was given the application, I was interviewed, and saw on my folder when the chairman of the admissions committee excused himself as Henry, Oster, Germ, Jew, 0. And I did not know what all these things meant, other than I was denied admission. The Jew did not work, the 0 worked even less, because it meant I did not fill out an endowment sheet that came with the application for admission. I always say, and I was denied 2 times. As I always say, I will not give the name of the university, but the initials are USC. USC was not a Jew-friendly university. It had obviously changed in these many years. I left the dental school with a disgust and disappointment. And the street at that time ran a streetcar. There was a streetcar running, lots of them at one time. And I got on it, and the last woman looked at the disgust and the curse word at the dental school, and I discovered another building which had nothing to do with USC, the Southern California College of Optometry. I happened to study with a young man who was going to be an optometrist because his dad was a very bright young man. And I said, he's no dummy. Oh, what the heck. I'll go and I will take an application. I was surprisingly readily accepted, and a month later entered the School of Optometry. And yes, I had no idea what an optometrist does. Never. Had an eye examination, knew a few offices in certain buildings, but I knew it had something to do with eyes and glasses. And I had practiced optometry for 60 years. I had the good fortune to find a location in Beverly Hills, not in a promising area for optometry for various reasons. I practiced there for 50 years. Fortunately, very successfully and very happily. Started a family and everything. And in 2004, I sold the practice. And as I kind of jokingly say, became afflicted with a chronic condition called boredom. I could not see myself not working even after 50 years. And I was fortunate enough at the age of 75 to be accepted by Kaiser Permanente, and I practiced there for another 10 years. I retired recently in 2014. The story that I share with you has a meaning that fortunately you will not experience, so definitely not. A success, a survival that cannot be explained. But I have to finish with one other comment. In 2011, my wife's cousin had said, oh, we should go to Europe and all that, he has to go to that business. And the city of Cologne has obviously been rebuilt, and I love going there. You should reconsider. He said, let me show you, and he had it Google Earth. And he says, you know, maybe the building didn't exist, so what's the purpose going back? So as we look over there, he discovered yellow spots all over the city. He zoomed in, and believe it or not, this is exactly the size of brass plates that he discovered. These plates were embedded in the sidewalk in front of the building where Jews were taken away from, as the names, the dates, their destination, their fate. And he makes an inquiry to see if my parents had still been memorialized. Doesn't tell us that. My wife didn't know, never mentioned anything. In 2011, all hell breaks loose. The German government of Cologne contacts me and informs me that they do have it somewhere. It was the wrong address, but that was the critical point. Would I consider coming to Germany? I swore I would never go back. Why would I go back? They told me of the 2011, deported in 1941, making 2011 the 70th anniversary of deportation. You're the only one. Only 23 people out of 2011 survived the war, and all perished except you. Well, that did kind of change my attitude. Everybody said, you know, after we decided, my wife, at least nobody else, would go back, not knowing what to expect. And then people asked me, Henry, after all these years that you swore you would not go back, can you give me one reason you will go back now? You better turn off the video. I said, that's the reason I will go back. The middle finger was the reason for going back. To show and prove that even 70 years later, the intent to kill 2,000 Jews from one city still has not succeeded. The same thing happened 5 years later, just last year, when it was the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Buchenwald. And I decided to go back for that purpose. I called out how many people they expect. They said, well, they'll all be housed in one hotel. I called the hotel and said, do you have any accommodation, which wasn't necessary, the Germans made it. They said, yes, we have. I said, how many rooms do you have? 64. So from 21,000 people liberated in 1945, it had come down to 64 accepted invitations. Of course, many have died, many are too old, too frail, and I'm sure a lot of them weren't interested. But again, I was the only German-speaking one that showed up. All the others were from Poland, Czechoslovakia, all over Europe. It was something you can see a few moments if you look up on the internet, Associated Press, Henry Oster, it shows the visit to Buchenwald. All of this in my speaking enthusiasm is to make sure that people understand what world can do. I'm sorry to say that our history is not clear and free. America committed genocide when we nearly eradicated American natives. America had a total acceptance, bringing people from all over Africa, make slaves out of them, and we agreed most of the time that it was certainly not inhuman. So it isn't only Germany. We had genocides since 1951, a total of 26. The only thing is it didn't touch our continent. It's in other countries with funny names, usually contained within the borders of that country, or maybe the continent. We have a difference now. Now we have a global attempted genocide called ISIS. I was invited to speak to the World Peace Conference in January, and the subject they gave me was genocide. I shook up the whole doggone convention because it was held in Ontario, California. And what I'm just saying, that we're living in the fear and apprehension about a genocide, is that the first American attack was only 24 miles away in San Bernardino. It was something that didn't even think about, but that's what we have to live with. We have to live with terror, we have to be on guard, and hopefully we'll be able to prevent the harm to our country and the rest of the world that Germany was willing to accept enthusiastically and with every support the Germans had. That's what I would call intolerance to the extreme. If you have any questions, I believe we've given enough time. Do we have?
Yeah,
Is there still some time?
Right about the door. 5 minutes.
We've got about 5 minutes or so, if you don't mind, if some of the kids want to stay in. But before we end, we have to skip this survey. And
That's it.
I'm here. You're welcome to take a look at my tattoo. It didn't mean a whole lot actually, except to the Germans, who actually always decided if they make selections of people that need to be killed, the ones with the lower number must have been in the camp the longest. They'll take them first. The strange thing is, juveniles only got 4 numbers, adults got 5 numbers. So if there were selections, we were always the first ones to be eliminated. Fortunately, it didn't happen to me. Otherwise, you'd be somewhere in the class listening to another story. So thank you for your attention. If you also have any questions later on and like to get in touch, I'm sure that you have my email. Then you're more than welcome to contact. I'll be more than happy to reply. Thank you for your attention. In Germany, you might have wondered, how would anybody know that you're Jewish? You look like everybody else. In the late 30s, we all had to wear a yellow star on the front left of our clothing and one on the back. That made you certainly less courageous to leave your home if you were late when they saw you coming and going. This is not my own, because when you're in a concentration camp, you have no possession except what you're wearing. Sadly, but happily in the other way, I found it in a flea market, and the gentleman selling did not know what it was. When I asked him, he said, I think it's got something to do with the Beatles, with the song, Hey Jude, because that's the name for Jew in German. So, very strange circumstances to find that. But you're welcome to see that too. What do we do next?
Does anybody have any questions?
Any question, I'd be more than happy, and not everything can be clear. Oh, come on
Does
now.
anybody want to speak?
I got it here. Yes,
Did you meet up with anyone?
you have to forgive me, my hearing aids don't reach.
Did you meet up with anyone that survived?
Do I what?
Did you meet up with anyone that
Well,
survived?
Have you found any other survivors?
I had one friendship that we encouraged ourselves and one another to hang in there. The only way we could survive, not by hatred, but by defiance and hope. We had agreed, even though the Germans were not worth to hate back. And so we had a close relationship because we were of one kind, one mind. The book was dedicated to him because in 2014, after all these years, he passed away. I have many good speakers at the Museum of Towns, Los Angeles Museum of the Holocaust. But I have a neighbor 2 doors down who was born in Lodge, but not anyone that we had known. We exchanged stories. He did make many friendships, and also the friendships he did make were dispersed all over the world. But there was one thing. I was on a cruise in Sydney, and I normally, the major city, will visit Holocaust museums. And at the exit, there was a display of a map of Europe with pins showing which camp was there and what kind of camp. And the donor had made a little plaque as to why he gave it, and put his name and oddly a number. The number was 8 people behind me. That's the only contact I ever made. He had passed away, but his family, his son, and his daughter are constantly in touch with me, hoping to supply information because their dad never, ever spoke about it. I'm constantly sending information that supplements the unknown about their fathers, but otherwise, no. Anyone else? Yes. Your age? I was 13. I don't know how old some of you are. You know, Jewish boys have a bar mitzvah, which I never had. They put me away 2 weeks before my bar mitzvah. I was just going to be 13, 2 or 3 weeks later. And I came out when I was 17. As a matter of fact, I had to go to high school where everybody is finished. 18. Graduated high school when I was 21 years old. So I gave up a lot of things, but hey, look what we have in this country. The biggest barn. Anyone else? Yes? From 1941 to 1945. But I must say, a concentration camp, this includes the ghetto. You cannot survive 4 years in a concentration camp. That was never designed. It was approximately half and half. And if it had been the need for the horses, probably would have perished somewhere along the line. These were circumstances which we cannot understand. And even when we hear about atrocities in other countries, in Muslim countries or in European ethnic cleansing, the world is always anxious to separate people from one another. And I always say that when I went back to Germany, I gave speeches in German to get it off my chest. Not hateful, but reminding them, because the current generation is not at fault what their parents or grandparents did. But I did say to them that the world will not forgive. They certainly can't forget. And they certainly don't understand. And as a German national, wherever you go, and they know you're German, the world will always see you accompanied by a shadow of guilt. And the expression shadow of guilt in the newspapers, the television, and even surprisingly when I went back the second time, is that the man who coined the shadow of guilt
as a return for a few days to the city of Cologne. So one can make a difference. But my only message is accept one another for who you are, not what you are. That is the biggest crime the Germans had, feeling superior and condemning people and killing people for whatever happened to be their religion. It's the ultimate crime. Anyone? Yes, there's one more. I'm not sure I can hear you. Tolerance, understanding, what difference does it make? Then, we have so much in the news about bullying. I can never understand that. Well, bullying or even Holocaust deniers are people of inferior intellect. They can only feel better at the expense of somebody else, discomfort. They feel that, there's something, they're being heard. It's ridiculous, utterly ridiculous. Because if one who does the bullying, or is a prejudice, or hates somebody, what about if it turns around and he's hated or she's hated? I have never been able to understand both the German and maybe general humanity, why we have to feel superior at the cost. But on other Tutsis in Rwanda, killing 800,000 people in 100 days, or whether the Muslim among themselves, the Shiites or the Sunnis can't get along, why people like in the Middle East, Jews and Palestinians, is a question. Maybe mankind was destined never to live at peace. What's interesting to me in history, when Europeans came to settle in America, the natives, the American Indians, the American natives were at war. The ones that dominated everything were the Comanches. They killed all the other tribes. So there is a tribal inability to live with one another. I hope not, but maybe we have to face the fact that to live in peace is not a regular standard way of behavior. We just have to hope. Any other questions that I can answer?
Develop this fund campaign, and we have some hungry kids here. Okay, if you'd like to continue a private conversation, go ahead. You can go to lunch.